Okay, let's dive right into this because the ashes of Westeros are literally settling around us, and we are witnessing a fundamental ground-up transformation in how this Game of Thrones is actually played. Look, the era of conventional wars, the massive armies meeting on open, grassy fields to clash with honor, that is entirely over. Done. Finished. With dragons in the sky rendering traditional military assaults not just obsolete, but frankly suicidal, a massive, terrifying power vacuum has opened up across the realm. The players who are left on the board, they aren't fighting for glory anymore, not at all. They are forced into utter desperation. We're talking guerrilla tactics, incredibly brutal psychological warfare, and fighting tooth and nail just to survive the fallout. So let's break down exactly how this new balance of power is shifting, and we're going to start by looking at the most dangerous man currently pulling the strings from the shadows.
If you look at the landscape of power right now, one figure suddenly dominates it all, and it might not be who you'd expect. Ormond Hightower. And here's the thing about Ormond. He isn't relying on fire and blood. He doesn't have a dragon. Instead, he is relying on this cold, deeply calculated composure. While all the other leaders in Westeros are totally panicking, retreating, or mourning their devastating losses, Ormond has positioned his massive host of 15,000 troops at Tumbleton with a chillingly methodical mindset. He recognizes, maybe better than anyone else, that brute force simply won't win this next phase of the conflict. He has this grand, overarching plan, and his truly formidable nature? It's rooted entirely in his ability to remain completely unbothered while the entire world practically burns around him. He is literally the calm center of a storm that is ripping Westeros apart.
To really understand Ormond's psychological dominance, we have to look closely at his constant use of that scent box. We see him use it repeatedly, ostensibly just to mask the odors of a dirty, chaotic war camp, right? But if you scratch beneath the surface, it is a psychological crutch. It masks his severe internal sensitivity and allows him to maintain this completely impenetrable facade of control. Just take his meeting with Lord and Lady Footley, for example. He asserts absolute, humiliating dominance over them by conducting high-stakes treason negotiations entirely in the nude, right in the middle of a midday bath. Think about that for a second. In a medieval society where heavy armor is synonymous with power and protection, standing up fully exposed is a terrifying power move. He strips away all his physical defenses, making everyone else in the room incredibly, deeply uncomfortable, all while acting as if it is just the most normal thing in the world. It is pure, unadulterated psychological warfare.
Which brings us to this exact moment. When the Footleys try to backpedal and claim they only swore fealty to Rhaenyra out of fear, Ormond just spits out this line with absolute venom. Or is she a bitch with a dragon? This single, vicious sentence completely dispels any lingering notion that he is an unserious man or just some pompous windbag from Old Town. It completely reframes his entire worldview for us. He does not view the opposing monarch as a legitimate ruler in any way, shape, or form. To Ormond, Rhaenyra is an illegitimate anomaly. She's just a usurper relying solely on a flying monster to hold on to power. He is entirely focused on restoring his own rigid, fundamentalist vision of the rightful line, and as we can see here, he will brook absolutely zero compromise in achieving it.
So, while Ormond consolidates this massive, terrifying power in Tumbleton with his unshakable composure, it really makes you wonder, where does this leave Criston Cole and the meager, battered remnants of the Green Army?
Well, the scene we get at Harrenhal is straight out of a piece of cinematic horror. Criston Cole and Gwaine Hightower finally arrive with their exhausted, battered host, only to find this massive, notoriously cursed fortress completely abandoned. I mean, they're just surrounded by the charred, horrific remains of Daemon's former forces, the slaughtered Strongs, and the terrifying, echoing emptiness of an abandoned dragon's nest. It's incredibly eerie. And amidst all this apocalyptic carnage, Aelys Rivers just simply appears. She is completely, almost unnervingly unfazed by the mass death surrounding her. She subtly guides their movements, casually dropping perfectly timed information about Aemon fleeing the region, and asserting this strange, quiet, deeply mystical control over the ruins of this giant fortress.
And let me tell you, the stakes for Criston Cole here are just unimaginably dire. King's Landing has fallen, Aegon is presumed lost. Cole is sitting on this tiny, exhausted, broken force, facing an enemy Riverman army that is literally 20 times his size. Now, retreating to join Ormond's massive host down in Tumbleton would absolutely be the logical military move here, but Cole? He refuses. Instead, he decides to completely pivot and utilize guerrilla tactics. He intends to attack this massive Riverman army like a scorpion striking an ox. It is an asymmetric, deeply reckless style of irregular warfare. He's relying on sabotage, night raids, and hit-and-run maneuvers to just slowly bleed a larger, less mobile military into submission.
We must cling to our honor, lest we become beasts ourselves. Listen to those words. This is the ultimate mantra of a fundamentally broken man embarking on a total suicide mission. Cole's psyche has been completely shattered by the apocalyptic trauma of what he witnessed at Rook's Rest. I mean, he has literally watched dragons turn his men to ash in seconds. There is no one seeing that. This new, reckless mission is driven by his deep, festering resentment of these highborn lords who treat war like it's just a game of chess they can easily walk away from. Cole knows full well this guerrilla fight won't be clean. It is going to be muddy, bloody, and desperately violent. But by framing it as this final cling to honor, he is desperately trying to find one last shred of purpose, a twisted, desperate concept of pure warfare in a dragonless suicide run.
So with the Greens fragmenting into these desperate guerrilla bands on one side and massive, ruthless armies on the other, a pretty terrifying question looms over Dragonstone. How exactly is Rhaenyra holding her own fragile council together?
Well, it's not going great. Rhaenyra has managed to take the capital, sure, but she is effectively trying to govern without the use of her most devastating weapons. Her total refusal to use dragons on civilian cities, because she's absolutely terrified of earning the historical moniker Maegor with teats, means every single political decision she makes right now is a dangerous tightrope walk. And her small council, it is deeply, deeply fractured. On one hand, you have Grand Maester Orwyle making a shockingly strategic suggestion to have the Winterwolves and Oscar Tully march down on Tumbleton to divert Ormond's massive threat. But at the exact same time, you have Mysaria orchestrating this brilliant, incredibly cynical piece of political theater. She sets up Torrhen Manderly as the new master of coin for one singular, calculated purpose: to serve as a highly convenient scapegoat for when the crown's inevitable, impending financial ruin finally becomes public knowledge.
But that political tightrope? It is snapping fast. When anti-black graffiti suddenly appears in King's Landing, literally labeling her the Queen of Bastards, Rhaenyra issues an incredibly careless, knee-jerk order for swift, heavy-handed punishment by the Goldcloaks. In compounding this massive error, she essentially confined the Dragon Rider off to the Red Keep after his drunken tavern brawls. Now, in the highly complex world of small folk public relations, these choices are nothing short of disastrous. They instantly strip away her carefully cultivated image as a liberator, and they make her appear far more cruel and authoritarian than she actually intends to be. At a time when the small folks' loyalty is incredibly fleeting and desperately needed to hold the city, ruling through fear like this is just a catastrophic misstep.
But while Rhaenyra struggles so hard with perception and authority over in the capital, we have to ask, how far will Daemon go to cover up an absolutely devastating family secret out in the muddy depths of the Riverlands?
The psychological weight of being the only Targaryen without a dragon has finally completely broken Rhaena. When we catch up with her, we find her totally transformed. She is living in a desolate, freezing cave, completely disheveled, and she's even hacked off all her hair with a blade. She has literally reduced herself to living like a common scavenger in the mud for one reason: just to claim the wild, insanely unpredictable beast, Sheep Stealer. Going out there and claiming this dangerous monster by hand-feeding its slaughtered sheep is her ultimate act of rebellion and self-actualization. For the absolute first time in her entire life, she finally feels complete, a true Targaryen, even knowing full well that Rhaenyra will very likely demand her head for her indirect role in the tragic death of Prince Jacaerys.
Now, think about the old Daemon. The old Daemon might have just dragged her back to Dragonstone in chains for defying orders, right? Instead, we see this really twisted, dark evolution of his paternal instinct. To protect Rhaenyra from Rhaenyra's very real wrath, Daemon commits a truly horrific act of scapegoating. He casually murders an innocent, random shepherd in a nearby field, brutally decapitates the poor guy, and then strides directly into Rhaenyra's small council meeting. He just slams this grisly, bloody head right onto the table, falsely claiming that this was the rogue dragon rider who stole Sheep Stealer. I mean, it's a deeply flawed, incredibly desperate lie, especially considering a massive wild dragon is still actively roaming free out there. But it is entirely motivated by this newfound dark necessity to shield his own blood from the executioner's block at any cost. So, while Daemon is out there literally committing murder to protect his blood, the actual king of Westeros is experiencing a completely, radically different reality. We have to look at what actually happens when the anointed ruler of the Seven Kingdoms loses absolutely everything.
Because the battlefield at Rook's Rest, it is a macabre, total wasteland. There is no glorious garrison left to hold it. Instead, you have desperate, starving local children picking through the thick mud, just looting the corpses of fallen soldiers. Draped lazily over the ruined castle wall is the massive, ruined corpse of the dragon Meleys, physically rotting and decomposing right out in the open air.
And right there, in the dead center of this absolute nightmare, lies Aegon's own dragon, Sunfire, seemingly dead on the scorched earth. We see Aegon standing over his beast in a state of total, weeping denial. He is screaming that Sunfire is still alive, completely unable to mentally process the absolute, shattering ruin of both his political power and his deepest magical bond.
And guys, this is the absolute rock bottom of a monarch's existence. Guided by Laera Strong into deep hiding just to avoid capture, the anointed king of the Seven Kingdoms is forced to conceal his true identity among the absolute lowest scavengers of the entire realm. Because of his severe, agonizing burn scars from the battle, he is brutally dubbed Mangleface by the locals. And in this deeply symbolic, heavily cinematic reversal of fortune, Laers actually forces Aegon to keep his head down and silently sort human waste, literally separating feces and urine into different buckets to sell. To watch a king, a man literally anointed by holy oils and the faith of the Seven, reduced to silent latrine duty just to survive the very war he himself started, it is absolutely staggering.
But the dominoes of his humiliation, they just keep falling. Aegon receives the absolute crushing news that his own brother, Aemond, has officially declared him dead to the realm in order to seize the Iron Throne for himself. And immediately following this devastating psychological blow, a common, filthy camp scavenger pulls a knife on Aegon just for demanding slightly better treatment over a meager, pathetic little meal. To save his own life in that moment, the true, anointed king of Westeros is forced down into the mud to literally kiss a scavenger's filthy boot. It is the absolute most visceral degradation of royal authority you could possibly imagine.
So with Aegon kissing boots in the mud, and Aemon completely abandoning his post to do his own thing, the Green leadership is fundamentally shattered. Which brings us full circle, right? Right back to Tumbleton. With all this chaos, what exactly is Ormond Hightower's ultimate endgame?
Well, that legendary, carefully maintained composure of his, it finally cracks. Ormond receives the Raven, bringing the news that Aemond and the massive dragon Vhagar are not coming to support his army. The mask slips entirely. In this sudden fit of explosive, kinetic rage, Ormond draws his ancestral Valyrian steel blade, Vigilance, and just violently hacks his wooden strategy table to pieces. It is a truly terrifying outburst that reveals the immense, crushing pressure he has actually been hiding this whole time. But, true to his chilling nature, once the violent outburst is over, he just calmly sits back down, sheaths the ancient sword, and immediately begins calculating a new, far more sinister endgame for Westeros.
To pivot his strategy, Ormond turns directly to the deep lore of Westerosi religion. He begins actively and aggressively twisting the faith of the Seven to manipulate the young, impressionable Daeron Targaryen. Now, the faith has always harbored a deep-seated, historical hatred for Targaryen incest and their dragon magic. Ormond weaponizes this history. He starts preaching this highly toxic ideology, convincing Daeron that pure-blooded Targaryens are actually a savage, unnatural race, and that their dragons are dark magic abominations that openly defy the gods. He masterfully plants the seed that because Daeron has Hightower blood, he is inherently superior, raised in the true light of the Seven. Ormond is no longer just fighting a political civil war over a throne, he is actively architecting a righteous, brainwashed holy crusade. And to establish this new world order, Ormond decides that Daeron must be the one true king. But to be a king in Ormond's new world, one must be entirely ruthless. We literally witness the creation of a monster here through horrifying psychological manipulation. Think about this. Earlier in the day, Ormond publicly appeared merciful by sparing a captured soldier, perfectly positioning himself as the benevolent savior to the troops. But in private, the terrifying duality of his nature is revealed. He drags that exact same spared man out into the dark and forces the young, hesitant Daeron to personally execute him. He forces a child to lift a heavy blade and sever a man's head, entirely to strip away Daeron's innocence, his empathy, and his mercy. Ormond is forging a pliable, blood-soaked puppet king right before our very eyes.
Ormond just watches this brutal execution conclude. He watches the blood literally soaking into the dirt, and he utters 4 incredibly chilling words. And now we begin. This paradigm shift is absolute. For Ormond, it is no longer about winning a few battles or taking a specific city. He has completely thrown out the old rules of Targaryen supremacy. With his manipulated, newly hardened, and deeply traumatized dragon rider in tow, he is marching forward to establish an entirely new, theocratic world order. One governed strictly by Hightower ideology, sanitized completely by the faith of the Seven, and justified entirely by the blood on a young boy's hands. We have just witnessed the complete, systematic degradation of traditional power in this realm. The great magical beasts that once conquered continents are now rotting on castle walls. Anointed kings are out there shoveling human waste and kissing the boots of scavengers in the mud just to survive a single night. The so-called rightful rulers are trapped in cages of their own political making, terrified to act. In a war where the old world is violently, systematically burning itself alive, the ultimate victors won't be the ones who are simply born to rule by divine right. No, they will be the cold, calculated players who are willing to completely strip away their own humanity and forge a bold, terrifying new reality out of the ashes. So I leave you with this. When all the dust settles, who do you think truly inherits the ashes of Westeros?